Well, good morning once again, everybody. Shri C.K. Mishra, Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Mr. Vivek Chandran, Program Manager, Transport Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. And of course, Himanshu, who used to be in ICRIER and has left for greener pastures to do a PhD at IIM Bangalore, but he's back because one of the authors of the report. And along with Himanshu, several others have been associated with the report. From ICRIER, and there's one curious thing that has happened about all who've been associated with this report. Their names are Shubham, Viraj, and Utkarsh. Himanshu, Shubham, Viraj, and Utkarsh are the four people who were chiefly, involved with this report, along with support from, of course, the Shakti Foundation, to whom we are extremely grateful. Utkarsh, as I said, is in Bangalore doing a PhD. Himanshu. Shubham is in Hong Kong. Doing a PhD, Viraj in UCLA doing a PhD, and Utkarsh is in Berlin working on a master's. All four of them, use this as a launching pad, along with ICRIER, to move on to, in quotes, greener pastures on using electric mobility as a vehicle to move on in their careers, and we wish them all the best and thank Himanshu for coming back. Of course, they have been supported by a huge team within ICRIER also, Amrita, Sejal, Dia, Manisha, yes, all of them. So we have a large team, and thank you, everybody. I won't say much. I just want to make a couple of points because there's a lot of stuff in the report which the Himanshu will talk about, and then we'll have a panel discussion. I just want to make 2 points. One, that we're very grateful having collaborated with Shakti Foundation, and we hope that we can continue this engagement with Shakti Foundation for the larger public interest and encouraging a public discourse in this area. Electric mobility, I think, one of the things that it suffers from is the architecture around fossil fuels in some sense was developed, and it has been developed for about a century, and it's matured and it's entrenched. And something that's entrenched becomes very difficult to dislodge, whether it's cost, whether it's your distance traveled, whether it's inertia, a whole lot of factors sort of conspire to keep you at the equilibrium or at the status quo, the current equilibrium. And we want to move to a new equilibrium, and we have to, and this will take time. This is not going to happen overnight. And I was just talking to somebody from the Asian Development Bank, and he was telling me that this idea actually we had begun to talk about electric mobility in the mid to late 90s in India. And we are in a position today where hopefully we can take off. And an analogy comes to mind, which is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of the QWERTY keyboard. The QWERTY keyboard is something that you've been using all through your digital lives, right? But you don't know the history of I think some of you may know, but most of you may not know the history of the QWERTY keyboard. That QWERTY design was developed in 1800 and 40 or 50 something. It's 150 years old. Can you think of any technology that is 150 years old that still continues to be in existence? I mean, you would be hard put to find a technology. But the idea of the QWERTY keyboard that sort of I wish to bring about is that the strategic complementarities of the QWERTY keyboard was such that despite the fact there is a new keyboard out there developed, post World War II, it's called the Dvorak Simplified Keyboard, or DSK. And people say it's a better technology. They've studied both the technologies, done experiments, and shown that there is a 15% improvement in efficiency if the DSK keyboard is used. That's the Dvorak Simplified Keyboard. And if that keyboard is used, you get a 15% improvement in efficiency. Of course, you could quibble with the design of the experiment, the way it was done, the quality of the people who were doing the experiments. But the essential point is, despite a better technology being in place, QWERTY still dominate. 90% of the keyboards that are made in the world today are QWERTY keyboards. And not because of only the keyboard itself, it's because of the sort of architecture around the keyboard, the program design, the content, the manufacturers, the status quo, the entrenched costs, what Paul Krugman called strategic complementarities of the ecosystem, conspire to keep the QWERTY keyboard in place. And it's difficult to dislodge until you're able to get a critical mass. Once you get a critical mass, the old technology will die. And I think that should happen, not with QWERTY. QWERTY is surviving, but it should happen with the old technology. But we need a critical mass, and often who provides critical mass? Government, and government has to design instruments so that we are able to get out of the current equilibrium of the status quo into a new sort of positive equilibrium. And I'm very happy that we are talking about this in ICRIER. We are talking about this everywhere today. All newspapers are talking about air pollution. Where I see, sometimes when I'm traveling across Delhi, I see fire tenders that are, spraying the trees. It's as if, how many of you remember Mir Taki? Mir is very nice. Sher, which says patta patta buta buta hal hamara jane. So all the trees, there's dust, there's pollution, and we're having to breathe this. So I think this is a critical time for us to begin discourse on this topic, and ICRIER is extremely pleased doing this, and I hope that we are able to get some traction, both in terms of our own sort of research, along with people like Himanshu, people like Vivek, who have been involved in this, but also in the larger ecosystem, and of course policy makers, so that we are able to push the needle on a change that we so desperately need in India. And the last point I'd like to make is that we need this change, but this change cannot come at the expense of our development objectives. And so we have to do them. So we don't necessarily need to talk about trade-offs, but we need to talk about our development objectives while, or our climate and air pollution or air quality objectives while meeting our development objectives. And I can tell you that it's not hard to do that today. Given the evolution of economic policy and instruments, we can actually achieve both at the same time. So with those words, I warmly welcome all of you to what I think, as I said, is an extremely topical discussion and a dissemination event. And I acknowledge the fact that this is something that in ICRIER we started about a decade ago working on climate change, and this area has scaled up, and very happy that this area has scaled up thanks to people, younger people who are working in this area, and I hope we are able to attract many more people to work on this area. With those words, warmly welcome you, especially the Secretary who's taken time off to come because he has somewhere else to go immediately after this. So thank you so much, C.K. Mishra, for coming here, and warm welcome once again to Himanshu and the team, and to Vivek. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kathuria. I now request Mr. Vivek Chandran, Program Manager, Transport from Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, to share his thoughts on Shakti, the study, and electric mobility in India.
Thank you very much. It's so difficult to go after such an eloquent speech. So that really put this work in context. Thank you, sir. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this gathering. This is an important piece of work that we started with ICRIER. Let me try and give you some context to our work, and just before they start with the presentation. So to start with, introduction to Shakti may be in order, because the work we do is, to a large extent, to facilitate a process. To facilitate the process, essentially, of enabling India to transition to a cleaner energy scenario. It also means that we work across the energy sectors. So we work on power, energy efficiency, and sustainable transport. And most of our work is in policy design and implementation. So when with that perspective, and sustainable transport being the bigger topic of discussion here, electric mobility is something that really popped out as an important area of intervention. So we started this work around 2 years ago, 2017. We started putting together our ideas on what the opportunity on electric mobility looks like. And there we articulated 4 barriers. So I'd like to just highlight some of that. The first one being the high cost of electric vehicles. The second one being that we don't have as many models of vehicles to choose from in the market. The third, of course, that there is just not enough charging infrastructure around, they need to be built. And the last one being, all of us included, awareness building is required. Awareness is very low. Even though people know of electric vehicles, there's a lot more to be understood on how it works, what it means to own one, what it means to operate one. So with these in mind, when you look at the first one, high cost, the first thing that you look at is what's the real cost of a vehicle? Almost 50%, 40% of the vehicle is the battery. And so the moment you start tackling that big issue, the rest of it will fall in place. So with that perspective, we started a lot of work on looking at what battery prices are looking like. Of course, BNEF puts in a lot of numbers and gives us a global perspective on how the numbers are falling. So that's hopeful place to be. Next 2-3 years, we expect a lot of the models to reach price parity, and that's pretty impressive. But at the same time, there are a lot of local Indian issues to deal with. For example, we don't have any of the value chains in place, right? And so is there an opportunity there on the adoption of electric mobility, the adoption of batteries, the adoption of the value system that batteries, the value chain that batteries bring, and what is that opportunity there? So that is where we started work. Of course, we have LEDs and others that have set the stage. LED has been something that India really was instrumental in bringing down its price globally. So what kind of opportunities to reduce battery prices exist? That was important to tackle. Some of it has been proved wrong, some of our hypotheses, some of it has been proved right. So the opportunities have also been identified. And with that, I would like to hand over to Himanshu and team. And I would like to first thank them for their work and the insight. Of course, the team is missing in action now. But congratulations. I think it's testament to the quality of work that has gone into this report and the effort that has been put in. So thank you all. And yeah, I'll hand over.
I now request the chief guest of our event today, Shri C.K. Mishra, Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, to say a few words on electric mobility in India.
Thank you very much, Mr. Himanshu, Shekhar, Rajat, Mr. Vivek, Chandran, all the distinguished people in this hall today. Very good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for having me over, because each time I interact with people who, unlike me, know a lot about the subject, I get to learn something. So it's a great opportunity for me. Just a couple of observations on Rajat's points first. Rajat, if you had told me earlier that being associated with the EV report means greener pasture, at least I would have read the report last night. And the other point you made about newspapers being full of articles on air pollution in Delhi, which of course is a challenge right now. You know, the interesting part is that newspapers in their editorials keep pointing out to the fact that, you know, this is a knee-jerk reaction of government whenever we have a problem and government does not work throughout the year, etc., etc. Although we have, let me tell you that at least I have in the last 18 months, every month sat with all the stakeholders to try and find a solution. But the interesting part is that none of these newspapers write anything about it until September and after February. So that is the level of concern that we have. And anyway, getting back to the issue, technicalities of e-vehicles, etc. I mean, the panel will give you, and I'm told there's a panel discussion after this. But I would just like to share my perspective from the angle of emission reduction and global warming and the climate change, and what it would mean to have an e-vehicle program which is robust and cost-effective. We really are talking against a backdrop of a global crisis. And what I really want to press here is that irrespective of the high and mighty saying whatever, the climate change issue is for real. And if you need to address the issue in its entirety, you will have to look at rapid reduction of emission. But rapid reduction of emission for some countries may be easier than others for the simple reason that the emission in those countries happened a couple of decades back. But there are countries who started late, and in those countries, the development imperatives are so strong that you just cannot discount that. So this is a kind of a dichotomy between the entire world today. And unfortunately, in the global discourse, we end up blaming each other. We talk about historical justice, climate justice. They talk about our responsibility at the moment. And if you look at, let's say, what is the world looking at in terms of reduction of emission? Let's be honest, it's a, compact group here and I can talk. They are looking at India and China. They're not looking at anything else. Not realizing that India is yet to provide electricity to a few million. About 15% of the population is still, with all our efforts, without mobility. Our per capita vehicle is among the lowest in the world. In total greenhouse gas emission, our per capita is less than 1/3 of the average of the world. But yet, we are responsible. And it's also correct to an extent, because being the fastest growing economy in the world, we will emit more and more. Therefore, as we proceed on this journey of development and growth, we need to be extremely careful on the emission reduction issue. And that is the whole point, where various technologies, including this technology in the transport sector, needs to be looked at very closely. And on top of all this, we also have global commitments that India has made. We have a commitment of reduction in the emission intensity to our GDP to the extent of about 32 to 35% by 2030. We have a commitment to actually get into renewables in a big way, and we have said that we will be 40% renewables by then. And we've also spoken about a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons additionality. The good news is we are extremely comfortable and well on course to achieve this. In fact, we will surpass all these targets. And the good news also is that I was reading a report of Climate Tracker. And the report says that there are only 5 countries on course to achieve the 2-degree target, if not the 1.5-degree target. And one of those 5 is India. So there are things happening, but still we have a huge problem at hand. And we need to find. So we need to closely look at the sources of emission. If you look at the Indian emissions, 2 critical things, apart from things like dust, which I'll not touch upon, 2 critical things where we need to really work is industry and transport. Industry, the major contribution being power sector, plus a host of unregulated industry in India not conforming to standards. It's not that we don't have standards, and our regulations are perhaps one of the best in the world. Implementation has been a challenge, and it's no new story for India. But this is a challenge we have to squarely address if we want to move on. I mean, I can share with you, we may have to shut down a few power plants in India, and you may hear it very soon. But we are committed that we will grow into a 5 trillion economy, but it's going to be a responsible growth. And that is why all this talk about 175 gigawatt of renewables by 2022, etc., are coming into force. And the kind of work that's been done is phenomenal, but I'm not going to get into what India has done. The issue is that one of the sectors we've just not been able to tackle in India is the transport sector. Even though the per capita number of vehicles is among the lowest in the world, even then we've not been able to tackle it. And I find two primary reasons for that. A, we have absolutely no credible public transport to reduce the dependence on personal vehicles. And B, we are used to commuting with vehicles irrespective of what emission they cause. Maybe 20 years, 25 years, whatever it is. In fact, this is a very interesting debate going on, and I am on the losing side. Because everybody has come up with a formula that you should ban vehicles which are 15-year-old, you should ban vehicles which are 20-year-old or whatever. My point is, what does the age of a vehicle have to do with emission? You ban vehicles on the basis of the emission. But there is a catch here. And the catch is that our systems of checking emission are not that robust. But I would still argue that the norm should be emission and not the age of the vehicle. As far as e-vehicles is concerned, e-mobility is one of the major programs of government. We've been in consultation led by NITI Aayog with the stakeholders for, I think, close to a year and a half now. I mean, I'm not talking about the primary work which was done earlier. The main work that is happening on the policy issues, and I've had the good fortune of being associated with that discussion. At one point of time, we did mention by 2030 will be, but what is meant by 2030 is that we must have a substantial presence up from the 1% that we have right now of electric vehicles in our system. If we are able to do that, we have done a calculation of what will be the carbon reduction in the next 10 years. And it's huge. So that is a primary thing that we are trying to address. And it is experts like people who are here who would advise the policy parameters for government on how to go ahead. And the kind of infrastructure that is required, I have a strong feeling that it should not be the government alone which should be a part of that infrastructure. The ownership of that infrastructure, according to me, must be led by the private sector. If they don't see value in it, there is a problem with your policy. You need to revisit. You need to have a policy where every entrepreneur, every investor will see value in creating that infrastructure. But one of the problems of transitions is that based on global experience, we always say that we'll switch over from X to Y. We don't realize the impact it is going to have on the individual's capacity to afford that new technology. Also, given the fact that despite all the discussions in the climate change COPs and other forums on transfer of technology, technology barrier globally continues to be one of the biggest challenges. And I dare say that no country is willing to break those barriers. It is only people who do not have technology are wanting to break barriers. Those with technology do not want to break that. And unless that is broken, and technology is available free-flowing across countries, cost reduction is a huge challenge. Because I don't think a country on its own will be able to really add to cost reduction. And I'm very happy that ICRIER and Shakti Foundation have worked on this. This will be extremely helpful for us. So while we move, there are two concerns I would like to share with you. And if somebody can, give me a scientific informed feedback on that at some stage, we'd be very happy to include in our discussions. One is that the total material demand in this transition is going to go up phenomenally. And that material demand has a bearing on the overall emissions in the country. We need to seriously look at that. The second critical issue is, we still, as a country, do not have technologies and know-hows of end-of-life disposal of lithium batteries. Third critical element is, how do we power these infrastructure, charging infrastructure which is required? And we need to seriously do a calculation on all these three counts to see what is the level of reduction and what is the extra load that we are creating. I am told some people globally have worked on this and say that e-mobility is a far better thing to do than worry about the other sets of problems. But I think scientifically we need to look at it. We also need to look at it from the angle that, are we in a position as a country to kind of maintain those charging stations with renewable energy, which would be the best thing that could possibly happen. I am given to understand that it is possible. And the way we are moving ahead in solar, as in LED, the cost of solar has also now come down. And this is a very interesting thing that I would like to share with you, just an aside. Whichever new technology or new item India has taken up on a mass scale has led to a huge reduction of price in the global market. I'll give you one example. Your vaccine, the 5 vaccines in one, was $9 when it was introduced. As soon as India introduced it in its immunization program in 2015, the cost came down to $1 in 1 year. So that is the kind of difference the volumes in India make to international pricing. So we should also be a little hopeful that if that happens, the prices across the globe of various requirements for e-mobility will come down. But we need to seriously look at cost-cutting technologies also. There are technologies around which we can use. Global experience is an extremely wonderful thing to have. But the kind of country we are, we should be concentrating based on the knowledge gained from global experience on local solutions. And that is why I urge all of you to really work on a technology which is not just technology of change, not just technology of reduction in emission, but a technology that is cost effective. And hopefully, e-mobility is going to be the answer, but particularly, I would say, in public transport sector. That is where our emphasis must lie. If we are able to do that, our reduction of emission from vehicular will come down drastically, and we will be able to do much better than what we are doing today. I thank you for this occasion. Thank you for having come up this report, and look forward to your suggestions in future, which I would be extremely happy to receive and perhaps be able to act upon. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir, for your inspiring speech. I now request Mr. Himanshu Shekhar, external consultant ICRIER, to present key highlights of the study.
Shri Mishra, Rajat sir, Vivek, thank you for giving this opportunity. Shri Mishra, you've just set the stage for me. Yeah. You just set the stage for me for going through this work that we have undertaken with Shakti Foundation on cost reduction of batteries. What we started with was that the cost is something that we'll have to look at, because batteries comprise nearly 50% of the cost. And there are other, when we go beyond the cell of the battery that we have been focusing a lot on, there are other options, or if you look at how the cell is used, how the cell is packed, how the cell finally goes to a second life or a final afterlife. Are there values there? Are there something that we as a consumer country or where can do something about it, or can leverage it to get cost reductions for our own usage? So that was the background with which this is the flow of the presentation. We talk about the inspiration and our objectives. We talk about some battery technologies which we already know a lot about. We've read about it. Then we estimate the cost of the batteries in terms of their cells and their packs, basis a tool, and see based on 7 different usage that Indian vehicles might have, what are the different cost split that can happen. Then we see around the value chain, is there a potential for cost reduction. Then we look at what are the policies, perspectives, and what are the strategies that India as a whole can take. We are concentrating more on the strategies rather than policies, because policies start a strategy which as an economy that we take. So our inspiration, as Shri Mishra already talked about, is that we have to achieve sustainable economic growth. There is no question about it. But EVs, by some means, provide 3 additions to it, which is reduction in greenhouse emissions, improving of air quality, and reduction of fossil fuel imports as well. So there is a definite good part about EVs. We know that the cost of the batteries are a very important cost in EVs, and therefore they put the biggest challenge in terms of this transition. In this study, we are looking at the cost itself. So the 3 questions that we are answering is, what is the cost component of the electric vehicle battery? What is the current status of EV value chain? Where are we? Are there cost reduction possibilities? What could be different strategies to reduce the cost? If not exactly the cost of the cell, but beyond that, what are the different strategies that we can take? So here we know lithium-ion batteries are the most widely used. They have transformed the way batteries have been working. They've increased, their capacity have increased, their performance has increased. There are 3-4 different types of lithium-ion batteries which are more prevalent now, which include lithium ferrophosphate, nickel, cobalt, aluminium, and nickel manganese cobalt. So these are the 3 different most prevalent. There are others. These are the most prevalent which are in use. Battery use is generally determined by the discharge rate, gravimetric density, volume density, cycle life. So these are the things that we have heard along a lot many reports that we've seen. So so going forward, what we are saying is what we want to estimate the cost of the batteries, and especially for Indian conditions. So what we use is a tool. The tool is not Indian, but we configure the tool to an Indian condition. It is a peer-reviewed tool which is made available by Argonne National Laboratory, US. For our assessment purpose, we use NMC 622 battery for all the applications. The prices of raw materials is as per international price. So what we are looking at, if it is made in India in an integrated factory with a 100,000 pack as their capacity, what will be the different usage that and what will be the cost split that happens. The final price is on 18-19 basis, but the tool itself has this that by 28-29 also the prices with reduction in the with increase in efficiency or increase in scale and increase in the material cost will come out to be a similar case. So as against what we have seen that there is a strong learning curve, we have kept it for the time being as a stable price, and that is what we have considered. So if you look at the main findings that we have is that for two-wheelers, the cost of the battery pack, or what we called the pack integration and purchase items, is the highest, which is around 40%. Similar for 45% is for three-wheelers. On the other side, when we look at the high intensity vehicles, which is the four-wheelers, the LCV, SUVs, the cost of materials goes up. So what we are seeing here is there's a distinction between the cost of material or the cost of cell versus the cost of the pack. So the cost of the pack is much higher in terms of what we consume a lot, which is a two-wheeler or a three-wheeler, and is much lower in terms of the high power vehicles or the four-wheelers or the high-end vehicles. What this means is there is a definite a definite kind of place for two-wheeler packs to be assembled in India rather than outside, because that is a quite bit of value addition that is happening there. Then the key insights that we have seen is the materials itself cost a lot. So right from the packaging material to battery cells material, they themselves cost a lot. Pack integration costs are significant for two and three-wheelers. The share of buildings and labor cost, which we see that there is an advantage that we can offer to the industry, is actually not much. So if you look at active material across all 7 applications, it is very significant. Cell finishing process, all 7 applications very significant. Negative active material. So if we look at materials which have come as very significant, and there is a need for integration with international value chains for that. But if we look at cells versus the packs offers actually quite a bit of advantage if we make it in India, especially for a two-wheeler or a three-wheeler application. Then secondary items of the module contribute significantly to the final price, which is the pack. Ancillary industries which support battery manufacturing should therefore be emphasized. One key thing that came up was that when we add the power, it does not add to the cost much, but when we add to the capacity, it does add. What it shows that if we have a large amount of or more number of people traveling 50 kilometers, so if I'm looking at 10 people traveling 50 kilometers and 5 people traveling 100 kilometers, it is 5 people traveling 100 kilometers which will cost more to the battery. What it means that if we have a swapping facility it will be definitely adding value in terms of cost. So swapping, especially for commercial vehicles, is a very important thing to bring down the cost of the battery to the ecosystem. Then when we look at the EV value chains. EV value chains, when we look at international value chains, they actually do not consider anything beyond the vehicle, and the focus mostly remains on the component of the cells. But when we took a look at India, the second life becomes very important. We look at adding two different components which are not studied extensively in other literature, which is the usage profile of the battery or the usage profile of the vehicle itself, and the second life of the battery, which becomes very important in case of India, because batteries do not drain out fully when they are completely used for the vehicle. They can be used for other application, which is stationary application, which requires lower charge and discharge rate. So there is a definite business case for moving into a second life kind of option for EV batteries after coming out of the car itself. Then the different usage profiles in terms of the swapping of batteries or battery as a service is something that also needs to be explored, especially in a cost-sensitive market like India. So there are opportunities and challenges in each of these. So if we look at material sourcing and cell manufacturing, there is a saving in shipping cost from outside. There is financing cost that can be factored in. Local design and local labor can create something very specific to India. But the challenges that remain is technological prowess. You have material supply chains which are not aligned to Indian borders. You have the biggest problem with cells has been that a mature technology actually gets obsolete in less than 5 years. So from NFP to NMC to NMC 811 now, which is still not in the vehicles, but it has come already. So that is itself a challenge in terms of cell. But in terms of usage profiles, shared and connected mobility, many new business options have come up. And all these actually work towards using the battery to the most, and vehicle is used with the battery. So battery can be replaced in those options, and the option of replacing battery itself before discarding the vehicle, discarding the battery for a second use before discarding the vehicle itself offers a very important gain in terms of the cost itself realized by the users. So yeah, we have challenges like traditional ownership, which is changing, and we don't have standard shapes and size, so swapping and refurbishing of battery in fact becomes very difficult. In terms of second life and afterlife, the batteries that we are looking at in lithium ion cell are highly recyclable. What we see is 90 to 95% of recovery of material. It's only the outer shell that is of the cell that is not recoverable. Rest everything is recoverable from inside. Therefore, the case for urban mining, the case for getting those material which we have already imported in form of cell to our own industry is very important. We don't have reverse logistics for most of the cases. It has started for e-waste, but still we need to work on that. The battery designs itself are not non-modular. The cells are modular, but the battery packs in India are not modular. The component interoperability is also not that good, and a standardization of transfers. So if a battery which is in going for a second use has to have a particular standard when it is transferred from say vehicle use to a stationary use, and those kind of standards also need to come up. The fourth, which is one of the most important, is research and development. A local technology or a local offering in terms of technology can be a great thing for India, but we don't have enough number of labs or enough number of professionals to support it. What we can see is from our study, the value chain cost reduction, there are a lot of cost reduction drivers in the value chain. In material sourcing, there will be access to supply chains and manufacturing, which might take a bit longer. And the gain will only come when we have sufficient scale. Same with cell manufacturing, there can be good amount of saving, but it will only come when we have sufficient scale. There is, apart from that charging and EV, there is also a scale comes first or the cost comes first is also a challenge that we face in EVs. So, but in terms of packaging, we definitely can reduce the cost of the battery if we standardize the, and if we have local software and local components for it. So there's a huge opportunity there. In terms of vehicle integration as well, so if we have standards of form factors and standards of battery, there is again a huge amount of saving that can happen. In terms of usage profile, we have not analyzed each of the usage profile, but usage profile itself brings down the cost, total cost of operations for the person, and therefore it will also have a significant impact. What we have seen is even on a very small ballpark approximation, if the person who is ready to take 60% of the battery in terms of 60% of the value of the second life battery, they will still be able to transfer a 20% discount to the new user if the user replaces battery. The same case in case of recycling, if the recycler takes 80% of the value, there will still be 13% discount that he will be able to offer to somebody who is recycling it. So there is a lot of user value that can be created for both second life as well as reuse. In terms of policy perspective, we have studied many countries, including UK, Germany, Sweden, Norway, and China. And there has been different ways of doing this. So we have looked at some support policies which are domestic manufacturing, support for government procurement, support for charging. So all these have direct or indirect. So if indirect in terms of increasing demand or scale, or indirect in terms of raising more investment, that we see as a potential in terms of policies. And more, if we look at the overall mapping between international policies and Indian policies, we are more or less in line. If we combine central government policy and state government policies, we are more or less in line with this. But what we want to do is, we wanted to do is convert this policy into India level strategies or India level alternatives. And then we went ahead and talked with different stakeholders and did a ranking exercise. What stakeholders are ready to actually accept the most. And that is where in terms of acceptability of the market or acceptability of the overall economy comes. And the ranking mode reflects that than the actual cost reduction that it can achieve. And we see that there is a lot of positive feedback in terms of cell manufacturing, that it should be incentivized. And a lot of local manufacturing in terms of cell or pack or say ancillary industries is something that the industry is looking at in terms of incentives. So that is where they want to the whole ecosystem to work towards in that sense. There are other incentives which is dedicated research institute will required, or other business options like battery as a service. But the industry mostly focuses on top 4, which includes manufacturing of cells and manufacturing of packs in India. So that is where they want the overall movement towards. So to conclude, cost of batteries remain a major roadblock. We have seen the cost of for all the 7 usage in 7 different usage in Indian condition. Packaging does form a very important part in 2- and 3-wheeler application. The commercial for commercial application, it is better that we design a higher power vehicle with a lower distance, so that there is a option of swapping, which will actually improve the cost efficiencies for the user or the person who is providing the commercial service. Value chain may provide important areas of cost reduction. Some key areas that achieve cost reduction is pack manufacturing, multiple business models, second life and afterlife. Stakeholders, however, perceive setting up cell manufacturing and cell components as the most important determinants of cost reduction, and they want the policy or the country to move in that direction. And this may be due to the fact that cell manufacturing capacity is the key in some sense of how do we start or where does it all start. So with this, thank you very much. I am open to questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Himanshu, for that in-depth presentation. The secretary has to leave, but I wanted to give some of you an opportunity to maybe ask one question, and you have. Please, may I request you to please be very brief so that we can collect one or two. Yes.
I expected Mr. Mishra to speak about the R&D in this area. Because now that the scope of CSR money has been extended to other areas also for R&D, will the government do something?
Okay. Yes, yes.
On this?
Yes, could you very quickly, please? Yes, yes, go ahead.
My friend, you very rightly touched that renewable, and this has a correlation. So I think if we can have an integrated approach, because renewable right now, the solar generation has been being considered rooftop is without batteries. So batteries are going to be hugely consumed in the renewable also. If you could integrate the structure.
Please be brief. Yes.
Mr. Mishra, I am involved in an electric bus project, and I've been trying to look at solar renewable energy for charging our batteries. I've been told I can't do it because the minimum charge required, the minimum power requirement is 1 megawatt. And if you cannot remove it, I cannot do it. So 1 megawatt must go because I need 350 kilowatts only. So 1 megawatt limitation must go. Thank you.
Thank you. CK, please.
Quickly, just responding. Sorry, I have to run, so I can't really interact with more questions. But R&D is very critical. And the reason why I did not touch upon it is because you're going to have a detailed discussion on various issues of EV. So I thought, traditionally, we as a country, as an industry, as a community have invested very little on R&D. But if you want to move to newer technologies, government will have to come up with an incentive scheme for more investment in R&D. And that, I think, will be a prerequisite for these things. As far as the integration issue is concerned, that's a very critical issue we are looking at. But then, immediately after your question came the answer. So, we will have to, you see, we are still formulating issues. Now, if the 1 megawatt thing doesn't work, at least for this segment, we'll have to look for an alternative. We have a representative from the Renewable Energy Ministry who will be able to throw more light on it. But I think in order to get there in a fast time frame and with cost-effective technology, such concerns will have to be addressed. And it is not such a major concern that it cannot be addressed. So we should be able to do that. But anyway, thank you very much. I hope you have a good discussion and we get a feedback which helps us think differently or think again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary, for coming here. Thank you, Vivek, and thank you, Himanshu. Please give them a big round of applause.
We will now take a short tea break and resume in 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you.